Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first sake podcast. I'm your host, John Poomer from the Sake Notes, also the administrator over at the Internet Sake Discord, and our resident sake nerd.
And I'm your host, Timothy Sullivan. I'm a sake samurai, sake educator, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And together, John and I will be tasting and chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand. So, John, we have a very special guest in the studio with us today. Have you heard about the latest sake book to hit the market?
Yes, I think I have. Would this be the Sake Bible?
Yes, the just published Japanese Sake Bible. Everything you need to know about great sake with tasting notes and scores for over 100 top brands. We have the author with us today, Mr. Brian Ashcraft.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm delighted and honored.
Yeah, thank you for virtually joining us all the way from Japan.
Oh, no problem.
Yeah, so Brian, for our listeners, why don't you give us a little bit of a self-introduction?
Sure. So my day job is writing for Kotaku.com about video games and manga and anime and hamburgers and pretty much anything I'd like to write about. I have a pretty wide leash over there, which is great. I also write for the Japan Times. I've been writing, I guess, professionally since 2004. And I've been living in Osaka since 2001. And I love sake. And so it's great to be here.
So all the pieces fell into place.
Yeah. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, I guess.
Yeah. So what inspired you to write a book about sake, apart from, obviously, your love of it?
So a few years back, I was pitching a series of books to my publisher, Tuttle. I wanted to do a tattoo book, and I wanted to do a whiskey book, a Japanese whiskey book, and then after that, I wanted to do a sake book. And it may sound kind of odd that one would pitch those three books at the same time, that they would be this kind of disjointed series of, I mean, two drink books kind of make sense, but then tattoos. But if you really think about it, if you spend, $30,000 on a full bodysuit, that's something that nobody can ever take away from you. And if you drink, a great bottle of whiskey, Yamazaki 25, or a fantastic sake, that's another experience that nobody can take away from you. So that was just something that really intrigued me about these three different topics. And I've always been interested in sake. It's always been on my radar, even as a little kid. Of course, I didn't drink it as a child, but my mom was actually into sake in like the late 60s and early 70s. And so, So growing up like in the family wet bar, there were sake sets next to German beer steins. And so for me as a kid, I didn't know what any of this really meant, but I just knew that this was just by looking at these vessels, there's a very sharp contrast. And, growing up as a kid, like, you kind of have an idea of what beer tastes like, whether it's like Brom Bones and like a Disney cartoon drinking beer, you just kind of, it's like frothy and foamy and something adults drink. But like sake was kind of a black box for me. And then when I moved to Japan, I started drinking sake, but everything really, really came into focus for me in 2005. I was a senior contributing editor at Wired Magazine, and I was doing a big piece on absinthe. And that article, in part, helped absinthe become legal in the United States. And so I was doing all this like research on drinks, and so I was like, I'm going to go around and visit some breweries. So I went to a brewery in Nara, and it just melted my mind. I mean, it just was like, I'm sure both y'all have this experience as well. I mean, the first time you walk into a brewery, it's like, whoa, like you can do this from this and you get this. Whoa. So it really got me really interested in sake. And at that point, I started doing more kind of game stuff for Kotaku. Started working for them around that same time. So my career took a different path, but I always wanted to come back to sake. And it was something that I care deeply about, and which is why I think what y'all are doing is just so great and so fantastic. And I'm hugely appreciative for all the tireless hard work that both y'all have done.
I really like the way that you've structured the chapters where you have these call-out sections that highlight very specific production methods or very specific people in the industry as you're going through a topic. So it's a really, really fun way to organize some pretty dense information. And that leads me to another question. You mentioned right in the foreword of the book that you focused the book more on sake culture and history, as opposed to being more of a technical guide to sake. What really drove you to make that decision, kind of formatting your book that way?
Because I think, like, for me, it's like, what can I add? We have this wonderful canon of English language literature. And we have people who have, going back to Atkinson, right? People who have studied it, the production methods in depth, people who have worked in breweries, and people who can bring that technical expertise. We have those books, and those books are fantastic. And if everybody keeps writing the same book, the literature we have doesn't grow. So I kind of was approaching this with, what is my skill set? What do I have to offer? And I felt like instead of redoing the fantastic books that we already have, I wanted to take a different approach. I wanted to talk about the people. I wanted to talk about the culture. I wanted to talk about stuff that's this, small batch, handmade stuff, and then talk about mass-produced sake that's made with, big industrial machines, and not make a qualitative value judgment on that. Tim, you really hit the nail on the head, and the fact that makes me very happy that you said that was the point. It was to kind of use certain moments or certain places or certain folks to drive home certain points. Early on in the book, I interview Taketsuru-san at Taketsuru Shizo, and they're just kind of the rite of passage, like passing down the brewery from one generation to the other. So I felt like once we hit that high note, I didn't need to do that elsewhere. Do you see what I'm saying? Right. And I think often with sake, some of the stories will be totally different between the breweries, but a lot of them is like, son or daughter leaves brewery, goes to big city, realizes they should come back and work for the brewery, and some of the stories can feel kind of samey. But I didn't want that. I wanted each page, each person, it should bring something new. And then if you read, the entire book, you should have the bigger picture of the industry, hopefully. An understanding of that.
Nice. So when you're relaxing at home with some sake, what kind of styles do you prefer for yourself?
I try to drink seasonally. So like last night I was like heating stuff up, right? It's because it's getting chilly here. So when the weather changes, what I drink changes. When it's hot, I'm drinking stuff that's a lot fresher and livelier, but as we slip into fall, I go from room temperature to like heating stuff up. It's getting kind of chilly here. So I just tend to drink seasonally, like I said. The other thing that I do is I always try to like find like the weirdest stuff. Whenever I go into a bar or a restaurant, or I always just ask somebody like, what's the weirdest thing you have here? And then I usually like to drink that. But yeah, is that, I guess, John, that you are a...
Yeah, that's my wife's exact technique.
She asks for crazy style.
Yeah, she says just in English, like crazy style, and they always have something. Like every bar has a bottle for when somebody wants something that's very unusual, and that's fascinating that a lot of people seem to be into that.
Yeah, and I think that means we're reaching a great point for sake where people are adventurous. They want to try something that's just off the wall, and that you can appreciate the kind of classic and standard releases. Of course, there's no need to discount them, but I think people are becoming much more adventurous with stuff that they want to drink and try.
Well, one of the big questions that I hear discussed a lot in the sake industry is kind of the $64,000 question. And I wanted to pose that to you as well. To grow the industry in the next 10, 20, 30 years, what do you think needs to happen to really expand the industry both in Japan and abroad? What types of things do you think the industry should do in order to grow and really try and bring sake to become more of a world beverage?
So that's a great question, Tim. And that's one of the reasons really why I wanted to do this book, because I felt like sake needs to take its rightful place alongside beer, wine, and whiskey as a world drink. It's too good to be this kind of niche, marginalized product. It should not be. It's too darn good. And I think that the best thing that sake has going for it is that sake is delicious. The product is there, And I think what we're starting to see abroad with the increased number of people in North America making sake, I think that's kind of the first big step. And then looking back at Japanese whiskey, whiskey isn't an indigenous product to Japan. It was brought to Japan, and for years, for decades, normal people in Japan did not drink it. And there was a point where it crossed over, and there was some kind of extenuating circumstances that sped that up, but it then became embraced by the larger public, and then it became viewed as kind of something that was Japanese. And I think that sake is on the path to that point outside of Japan, where that it will reach a point where people, when people in California, they drink wine, they're thinking local wine, right? Or beer, when people drink, beer in Texas, they're not thinking that they're drinking German beer. They're thinking they're drinking beer from Texas, even though it might be in a German style. So I think that there will be, that's just a logical progression, and it will take time. It's just something that will take time, but I think that it will get there. And I think that the breweries that are in the US and in North America are producing excellent stuff. And so it's just getting that in people's glasses and then getting them to think like, hey, you don't need to drink this with Japanese food. You can have this with, pizza or, spicy chicken or Mexican food or all sorts of different stuff. And then I think that in that regards, it becomes much more familiar. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to take time. And I know that probably maybe because since both of y'all are in New York, maybe less so. But I know, like, for example, like in Texas, where my family lives, getting stuff into the state can be difficult. We can't get like Brooklyn Kura in Texas, right?
Not yet.
Not yet. Yeah. And so there's a lot of kind of like distribution stuff and that kind of infrastructure, which with time will become strengthened. And I don't see any way where it's not inevitable where North America fully embraces sake. I just don't see it, where a world where that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And if you look at North America, like the expertise in drink making in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, and kind of the storied history in three countries for making excellent drinks, this is like a great place to make sake. They're going to nail it, and they're on their way without a doubt.
Yeah. So it's customary on our show that we have a couple of glasses of sake and talk about them a little bit. And for today, we actually have sakes that are covered in the tasting notes section of the book. So all three of us have different sakes that are covered in the book. And we'll talk a little bit about them. Brian, you being our guest, what are you going to be sipping with us this morning?
This morning, yeah. Early morning in Japan. Yeah. So I've saved a tiny bit of Tamagawa. It's made from Gohyaku Mangoku, and it's from the 2016 brewing year. Mm-hmm. Just a tip that Harper-san, the Toji there, told me, when you buy their sake, if you see the oldest year that they have, buy that. So
I've heard similar advice about Tamagawa in the past.
Yeah.
But, if it's older stock, don't worry about it. It's only going to get better.
Right. Yeah. And so I could have kept this at home and let it kick around a bit more to age, but I have polished most of it off. So I will take a tiny sip this morning.
And John, do you want to introduce us to the sake that you brought?
Yes, I have a very recent import, relatively speaking, to the United States. This is the Kazenomori Tsuyu Bakaze. I've also seen it as Hakaze Junmai, and it is from Yuzo Shuzo in Nara, and they make some wonderful, wonderful sake.
It's interesting that you mentioned the different spellings for that, because if you look at I should probably call up Yucho and confirm, but if you look at the Nara's Brewers Association, their official site or whatever, they spell it Akaze. And it's just easier, I think, to say in Japanese if it's ba instead of ha. And then the brewery that really kind of revived it They spell it as ba as well, so I don't know how it became ha and why there's different spelling. So
that's weird, but yeah, it is. I guess for purposes of our listeners at home, if they're in the U.S., if they're looking for it, they're going to want to look for the ha,
right,
the hakaze, because it's if they look for the bakaze, they're not going to. Unfortunately, in the U.S., not going to find it. It's very strange, and yeah, I'm a very big fan of this brewery's sake. For a time when I was visiting Japan, this is the sake that when I would ask for recommendations, I'd get. Like it would, this not this specific one, but this brewery, this brand, this Kazeno Mori is something that when I go and explain what I'm into and other sakes I like, they're always like, oh, well, boom, you're going to try this. And always had wonderful experiences with it. Tim, what did you bring along?
Well, our listeners might be surprised, but I brought a very iconic sake. I have the Ozeki 1 Cup.
Tim, this is not a daiginjo.
It is not a daiginjo.
Notably not a daiginjo.
This is not how I usually roll. But,
no, it is not.
But the Ozeki 1 Cup has a call out in Brian's book. There's a really wonderful few pages on the development of the 1 Cup, which was fascinating. And it's also featured in the tasting notes in the back as well. And I think that one thing that made me really want to select this sake out of all the fantastic sakes in the book is that something Brian alluded to just a bit earlier, that it's not just about the ultra rare microbrewed sakes. There's another side of the industry that the more widely produced sakes have real respectability to them, and they sometimes get undeserved bad rap. And I've really enjoyed drinking this sake in the past. And so that's something I really wanted to highlight. So that's why I brought this one along today.
I mean, that's a fantastic point, Tim. I remember going to like a really famous brewery, and the Kuromoto Toji there was like, what do you like to drink? I was like, I like, Ozeki 1 Cup. And he like started laughing at me. And then I was like, I was like, wait. And I gave a thoughtful reply as to why, the history of it, how important it is. It's probably one of the most important alcoholic drinks released since the end of World War II. It created an entirely new segment, just the thought that went into the design. And it has become maligned because of kind of it was originally aimed at young, hip, cool people. And its drinkers got older. And so people kind of viewed it that way. But when we were doing the book, Eguchi-san, my co-author, and I were getting together. It's like, what are we going to do for the tasting notes? And we both quickly agreed, we need to put 1 cup Ozeki in there. It just happened to be in there. And it was like other alcoholic drinks, we'll say, have sometimes developed baggage and snobbery and kind of like exclusivity. I don't want that for sake. There's nothing wrong with super high-end, super premium, super expensive stuff. That's great. But we should also embrace and respect something that's well-made and has no bones about what it is. Has no frills, and it is exactly what it is, and it's not pretentious, and it's good.
Yeah.
Nice.
So, Brian, why don't you go first? And if you don't mind, you can pour yourself a sip of the Tamagawa and give us a little tasting note or your impressions on it.
Okay. So I'm drinking this at room temperature. But I drank it at about 50 or 55 degrees C last night. I've forgotten what Fahrenheit. What is that in Fahrenheit? I don't remember anymore.
Hot.
Hot. Yeah, hot. There we go. So I drank it hot. So now at room temperature. So right off the bat, lots of rice, like really grain forward. Hay. Get hay. Honey is another thing that I get. Marshmallows, but not like roasted marshmallows, but like just marshmallows. And it's just very reminiscent of early fall, not later fall. Not crunchy leaves, but early fall. Even though this is an older sake, it's still a very bright sake, I think. Something that I get with a lot of Tamagawa stuff is like either candle wax or beeswax. But in like Time Machine, I always get like what I would say is more like beeswax. And then if I heat it up that kind of becomes much more like a savory, kind of almost like kind of like dashi, but you still get a kind of that on the back end, and then just a lot of alcohol in the finish, like a really. And I think that's the one thing that I like about Tamagawa so much is that it's a super robust sake, but it's not cloying. I think it's because you get all that alcohol in the finish. It cleans out the palate, and you just want another sip then. And if it kind of stuck around and you got this kind of like, sometimes you get that with older stuff. It wouldn't be such a, it wouldn't be the reason why I've nearly polished off this bottle. I mean, it's incredibly great. So that would be my tasting notes for that.
Yeah,
Nice,
the structure is almost like what I would call indestructible. It has that kind of body and structure to it. Mm-hmm. And I love all the descriptors you used really speak to the depth of flavor that you get and the complexity that Harper-san crafts into that sake. So it's a wonderful example to have in the industry of the depth you can achieve with sake.
Yeah.
And this is coming from someone who studied sake making in Niigata, and it's all about like how whisper quiet can we make it. So it's kind of the polar opposite of what I was trained to brew, but it has such depth of flavor and such complexity that I'm so glad we have such a great example of that sake style.
And that's one of my favorite things about sake. Like, for example, like kind of the classic Niigata style that you were trained to do, Tim. Because we have that, it makes this style even better. And if we only had this style, I don't think it would be as good. That we have these kind of comparisons. It's like we can go from this and what you're saying, what's become the hallmark Niigata style is great. And it's even greater because we have this, this other style. And I think that just kind of spectrum for me is one of the most appealing things about sake.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, John, I think you're up.
Oh, right. Well, I'm going to open this one up. Now, this is bottled immediately after pressing, so there is usually a little bit of a pop to it when we open it. So let's see if we can capture any of that. So, yes, this is very fresh. Okay. I want to note while I'm getting ready to pour this that this is only milled down to 80%. So this is a Junmai. And this is our ASMR portion. And so on the nose, there's a little bit of a dryness that comes across on the nose, and it reminds me a lot of what you get from the aroma of some sparkling wines, but with a nice amount of fruit. And then when I sip on this, the first thing I notice is the mouthfeel, because it is dancing across your tongue the entire time. It is all over your mouth. It is extremely unusual and interesting in that way, because this is not sparkling. This is just very fast press. This is pressed and put into a bottle, and we're off to the races. But you're getting a lot of melon. You're getting some floral notes. It's nice and creamy a little bit, and then on the end you got a nice little umami spike, and then it kind of just drops off, and you're ready for your next sip. Really nice. This is like it's almost juicy in some ways, because it's really got a nice amount of fruit to it. It does not at all taste like something that was only milled to 80%, because there's almost no rice notes on this. It's fruit and then umami. It's really nice.
Brian, would you say that Kaze no Mori is one of those brands that is kind of riding this new wave of styling their sake in a new way, almost like a wine-like, or more certain characteristics that are not traditional classic sake characteristics? Would you say they fall into that category?
I would say, yeah, definitely the Kaze no Mori brand is a very contemporary and very modern. The thing that, and John pointed this out, and I think that this is one of the most fascinating thing about that brand, is that a lot of the rice isn't milled very much. It's not polished very much at all. And so in many ways, it's almost like it's the opposite direction of where a lot of the contemporary sake had gone for a while. It's like, let's see how much we can polish it, where this is kind of going the opposite way. And it's like, let's use a lot of the rice and then still get these amazing flavors out of it. So I think that's one of the most interesting things about that. I also really like how their sake has like this kind of, it's made with really, really hard water.
Mm-hmm.
Like that water is super hard. And if there's a tap out front, like a pipe or something, and you can, fill up a jug or a cup, I guess, whatever of that water and drink it. And that kind of like that hard, like kind of minerally flavors still carry through. So I always feel if there are sakes that there's a lot of freshness and fruits and stuff like that, but there's always this kind of like minerally note that's underscored through them, which I think makes it just fascinating. Just a really, really great brand.
Yeah, this is wonderful stuff. Tim.
All right.
You're up.
Well, for those of you who are listening in, if you haven't seen a 1-cup sake before, check out our show notes, and we'll have a picture posted there. It's basically like a glass cup, picture like a jam jar shape, and then it's got a foil lid on it that you peel off. So I'm going to go ahead and peel off the tab now. All right. And then there's not going to be any pouring sound because it's already in the cup, and you just sip right out of the container it came in. This is one of the best inventions of the 20th century, I think, 1-cup sake. Okay, now, I think, as I mentioned before, one of the reasons I picked this sake is because it is an icon of the 20th century in Japan, for sure. You see this Ozeki 1-cup everywhere, and it's something that is completely ubiquitous in Japan. And one thing I loved in your book, Brian, is that you kind of gave us a vision of what life was before 1-cup, like when this was being developed, and they were batting around the ideas for this. It's like, oh my gosh, this is something that hasn't been around forever. And that was just really exciting to read about. So when you smell this sake, it is that classic rice flavor. I did some research. There's different listings on different Ozeki websites to what the stats are for this sake. But what I've come up with, most agree that this is actually a Junmai sake, 14% alcohol. The milling rate here is 78% remaining, and the rice is gohyaku mangoku. So that is a kind of more restrained rice, but the aroma is very, very classic sake aroma and just iconic. I'm going to go ahead and give it a sip as well. Yeah, it's just super classic. It's rice, very rice forward, and full-bodied, overall dry impression, like no sweetness, but ricey, dry, classic. It is not layered, not much nuance or complexity, but just super classic, straightforward. And you can serve this warm. You can put this cup right into hot water and warm it up. But I like to drink it very well chilled, and that brings out a little more crispness for me.
When I moved to Japan, I didn't have any money. And so I was eating pretty much exclusively at convenience stores. And so I was drinking a lot of this. So it was one of those things, that always, for me, remembers a certain time and a place in my life. It's well made. It's good stuff. It should get the respect that it deserves.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, Brian, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. It was an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And I really want to encourage all of our listeners to pick up your book, The Japanese Sake Bible by Brian Ashcraft, available anywhere you can buy quality books. And it was a joy to read and an absolute pleasure having you on today. Thank you so much for joining us.
It was a huge honor to be here with both y'all, and I had a great time. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you again.
All right. Well, a special thank you to Brian Ashcraft for joining us, and a thank you also to all our listeners for tuning in. We really do hope that you're enjoying our show. If you'd like to show your support for Sake Revolution, there's one way you can really help us out, and that would be to take a couple of minutes and leave a written review on Apple Podcasts. It's really one of the best ways for us to get the word out about our show.
Also, be sure to subscribe wherever you download your podcast so you do not miss a single episode.
And as always, to learn more about any of the topics or sakes we talked about in today's episode, be sure to visit our website, sakerevolution.com, for all the detailed show notes.
And if you have somebody that you would like us to interview about their sake book, if you have sake questions that you want answered, if you have sakes you want us to try, topics you want to hear about, reach out to us at feedback@sakerevolution.com, and we will get back to you. So, until next time, please remember, keep drinking sake and kanpai.